Hello. As project coordinator for Mapping Women's Suffrage, I just wanted to say a few introductory words ahead of our video montage sharing suffrage stories, Our Ethel in Kent. The Mapping Women's Suffrage project aims to bring people together from diverse places and communities to discover, share and understand more about the lives and materials of as many ordinary votes for women campaigners as possible, ready for the suffrage centenary in 2028. Marking 100 years since women got the vote on the same terms as men. This video montage is really a celebration of that coming together. It begins with Kent researcher and author of Suffragettes of Kent, Jennifer Godfrey, who tells us about her fascinating work on the previously hidden working class suffragette, Ethel Baldock. And this is followed by recorded family memories from some of Our Ethel's ancestors, Eileen and Patricia. And they share with us what their relationship to Ethel means to them. Finally, we hear the lively voices of Mum Sarah and daughter Isabeau, current residents of the house where Ethel grew up as a child. And they share with us their feelings about living in a suffragette's house, the difference this knowledge has made to them, and importantly for me, the way Ethel's actions as a young woman in the Votes for Women past has impacted upon the actions of the inspirational young Isabeau in the present. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the participants for being involved in making this film for Mapping Women's Suffrage, for recording themselves through the difficult and restricted times of life during the coronavirus pandemic, and for being willing to share their research, thoughts and stories with us all. Here's sharing suffrage stories, Our Ethel. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Godfrey and I am the author of Suffragettes of Kent. In my book I tell the stories and part stories of those involved in women's suffrage in the county of Kent. They were people who lived in Kent and those that travelled to Kent in order to campaign. Whilst doing my research, I came across the story of Ethel Violet Baldock, and you can see Ethel just here, and she features prominently on the front cover of the book. I was lucky enough to meet some of her descendants, and they helped fill in some of the gaps to her story, and I'm going to talk a bit more about Ethel now. So Ethel was a little different from some of the other women that I'd found out about when researching. Women like Amelia Scott from Tunbridge Wells and Vera Conway Gordon from Rochester. They were both affluent women able to dedicate their spare time to campaigning for women's suffrage. Ethel, she was from a working class family. Ethel was born in 1893 in a place called Gravesend in Kent, and she then spent her childhood in Maidstone, also in Kent. In 1899, unfortunately, Ethel lost both her mother and a sister, and in the same year her father, as was the norm then, brought in a housekeeper to help manage the home and the children, and he married his housekeeper Martha that same year, 1899. And so Ethel and her siblings had a stepmother and a stepsister. Ethel went into service as a maid at quite a young age, and it's understood that she would have got this position with the help of her Aunt Jane, that's the sister of her father. Apparently she would look for them and find them appropriate places to work and serve. It's known that Ethel was in service in 1909 because she sent a postcard to her sister Fanny, or Frances, from Broadstairs Station. That's another place in Kent on the coast. And in 1911 we know from the census that Ethel was then living in Tunbridge Wells. She was actually living with her sister Frances and Frances's husband, but she was working as a maid and a waitress in a hotel in Tunbridge Wells. In March 1912, we know that Ethel was involved in the protest in London held and managed by the WSPU, that's the Women's Social and Political Union. This was a protest that was a little different from others before because the sole aim of this protest was to cause property damage, and this was done by smashing windows. It's not clear why Ethel was even there, why she'd travelled from Tunbridge Wells to London to take part in this. Who had she gone with? We don't actually know the answers to those questions. On the 1st of March, Ethel was arrested with a woman called Violet Bland for breaking the window of number 1 Northumberland Avenue, and that belonged to the commercial cable company. Ethel was a 20-year-old working class maid and had never been involved in any protest of this sort before. Violet Bland, on the other hand, was a well-known active WSPU member, and so it seems they were paired up in some way to together break that pane of glass. Now, they were arrested, and along with over 100 other women that night, they were taken and they were held in Holloway Prison. Ethel was held on remand at Holloway Prison for about 26 days, but there's no record of her experience there, no diaries, no letters, no accounts. So in my book I use accounts from other sources, other women that were imprisoned at the time, and of course the governor there. And I'm just going to read an extract from my book. This account was given by the governor of Holloway Prison, and his name was James Scott. This morning, Sunday 3rd March 1912, when the remanded prisoners were unlocked for exercise, they demanded to see Mrs. Pankhurst. They were informed that she was in another class being convicted and would exercise at another time. They refused to go to exercise or to return to their cells until they saw her. They linked arms, shouted and made a disturbance. I gave instructions that they should be told that they must cease the disturbance and return to their cells, or they would be put back forcibly. They refused to go to their cells, so after allowing them a reasonable time for consideration, I sent female officers to put them back, which they did. Some of the prisoners resisted strongly and got their clothing torn. I have not heard of any injury or of consequence either to officers or the prisoners. The matron and I consider that the officers discharged this disagreeable duty well and allowed much discretion and forbearance. Mrs. Pankhurst demanded to see me and told the matron, "I gave the governor a hint yesterday that we should have a talk and try to come to terms." As there could be no question about coming to terms with her about prison rules and discipline, I refused to see her and did not do so. After the prisoners were put back in their cells, they committed a great deal of damage and made a great disturbance by knocking on their cell doors. They have threatened a hunger strike, but I cannot speak definitely as to this yet. As a result of the disturbance, the morning service in the chapel could not be held. The ordinary prisoners have behaved well. The great majority of them do not appear to be at all in favour of the suffragettes. So at their trial at the Newington Court, Ethel and Violet were both found guilty of maliciously damaging the window in Northumberland Avenue. Ethel, probably because she hadn't been involved in a protest before, not been in trouble before, was released that day, 27th of March 1912. There was a surety of £5 that had to be paid. No idea how that was paid. That would have been a lot of money for Ethel as a working class maid, but that was paid, and she had to agree to be bound over for 12 months, so to be peaceful for 12 months, and was released. Violet Bland, on the other hand, a well-known active WSPU member, previously arrested, but not imprisoned, was actually given a 4-month hard labour sentence, and she was actually sent to Aylesbury prison in Buckinghamshire, where she was forcibly fed along with some other women, and that included actually a Kent woman called Olive Walton. It's not known if Ethel and Violet ever saw each other or spoke to each other again after this. Ethel actually married Arthur Hodge and had her son Donald in 1919, and she actually sadly died at quite a young age, at 46, in Tunbridge Wells. One of the questions I often thought about when I was researching and writing about Ethel was, what did her family make of her actions and her imprisonment? How did they find out that she'd been imprisoned? They will have read articles in newspapers potentially about the protest. What did they make of it? And on one of the days early on, when Ethel was first arrested and remanded at Holloway, Miss Christabel Pankhurst, who was actually on the run, she was wanted by the police for her part in the protest, had some articles published, and one of them was this: broken windows. Every step in the militant campaign, including the first, has provoked at the moment when it was made a new outburst of censure. For practical reasons it is impossible for us to regret this. It is part of the effect of militancy that it shall excite regret and consternation. Our very definite purpose is to create an intolerable situation for the government, and if need be for the public as a whole. The attack, not indeed a very serious one, but still an attack on private property, is the latest subject of censure. Government property, say the critics, you are justified in attacking, but not private property. Militant suffragists would of course be glad if an attack on government property were sufficient to attain their purpose. They would have been yet more glad if the eventless militant action of the earlier days had sufficed. But the present policy of the government proves that these measures are not powerful enough to produce the effect desired. They have produced only a sham concession to our demand. More drastic measures have been proved to be essential to gain the genuine confession that we seek. That is why private property has now been attacked. The message of the broken pane is that women are determined that the lives of their sisters shall no longer be broken, and that in future those who have to obey this law shall have a voice in saying what the law shall be. Since writing the book, my thoughts have also gone towards, what did Ethel think while she was in prison? When she was going to the police court hearing and then later to trial, did she have in mind something she'd like to say? Did she want to try to get released as quickly as possible, or was she quite happy to follow in the footsteps of others like Violet Bland and do a longer sentence in prison? These are the sort of questions I often think about, and of course we don't know the answers to those.
Hello, my name is Eileen and this is my sister Tricia, and we are the granddaughters of Ethel Baldock, who lived and was active in the suffrage movement in Tunbridge Wells in Kent. Although we never knew our grandmother, as she died well before either of us was born, we knew about the suffrage campaign because our dad, her son, had often mentioned it to us from an early age. Like the two of us, he was extremely proud of her involvement.
We think her actions were very brave, as 100+ years ago, women were very much considered second-class citizens, with very few rights. She was involved in protests in London and smashed a window which led to her arrest. She was in Holloway prison with Violet Bland and at the same time as Eileen Pankhurst, which must have been terrifying for her. Dad told us stories of her knocking off a policeman's helmet, chaining herself to railings, and riding through Tunbridge Wells on a bicycle, dressed only in her underwear.
As a result of hearing what she did for the cause, we have always felt it very important to exercise our right to vote, and we shall both be very honoured to see her name on the Mapping Women's Suffrage project.
Before we got the letter from Jennifer about Ethel living in our house, we knew little bits about the women's suffragette movement, but we didn't know very much. What did you know?
All I know was that it was a group of women who were trying to fight for the rights for women.
Absolutely. Can you remember some of the things that they did?
Smashed windows, and then sometimes they broke into the Parliament meetings.
They did, didn't they? And they went on hunger strikes sometimes, and they chained themselves to railings, and that was pretty much all we knew to start with, isn't it? So when Jennifer sent us the picture with Ethel in it, we had seen that photo before, hadn't
Yeah.
we? Because we've been doing some research about our house, and we've been sent that picture, but what we didn't know were the names of any of the people in it. So to find out that one of the girls was Ethel and her amazing story was really interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So we know that Ethel lived in our house in 1899
Yes.
with her
Dad and stepmother, who her father married. May.
Yes, May was the stepsister, and they had, how many other sisters?
6.
6, and the 2 boys. So there was quite a lot of children living in one house, and we only have 2 bedrooms. So there would have been a lot of children sharing one room. Would you like to share with your brothers?
No way.
Do you think they would have got on?
No.
So when we found out about Ethel's story and some of the things she did, we were quite impressed.
Yeah.
I felt quite proud as well to think that somebody who was prepared to stand up for the rights of women and her colleagues and friends is a really good thing to do. Going to prison and breaking the windows. I don't know if I could be that brave. Do you think you could be brave?
I feel like I'd be brave enough to do it.
Yeah, for the right, to do what's right.
Yeah.
And have that courage. We think Ethel was a really strong character, and we're really proud that she lived in our house.
Yeah.
Knowing that Ethel lived in our house makes me really glad that I live here too, because what this experience has done is given us lots of information about Ethel and the suffragette movement, and I think it's inspired us, hasn't it? We've done lots of research and looked into the suffragette movement and Victorian life. We've looked at some jobs in the workhouse and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy that I live in a house that used to have a suffragette in it. Since researching and learning about Ethel, we have been really inspired and proactive about our research. Isabeau has been really prolific in her work. What have you been up to?
I've made a PowerPoint, lots of questionnaires for the neighbours in our street.
And what were you asking them? What did you want to find out?
How much they knew about the suffragettes and what they knew about the suffragettes.
And what were our findings?
Yeah.
They didn't know very much, really, did
No.
they? So what did you then do?
I then
You talked to them and explained
and
about
explained it to them in more detail than the questionnaire.
Yeah. We've been reading Jennifer's book to find out more about Ethel. And what happened the other night?
The generation of the Baldocks, not one of the son's child came to our house and told us that her grandfather used to live in our house.
So it turns out that one of the little boys in the picture was this lady's grandfather, and by coincidence she turned up on our doorstep. So we then told her all about Ethel, and they were going to go talk to a great aunt and find out what other information they knew.
So now they've got a copy
of
the book.
So they've ordered a copy of the book. And it's really interesting what a small world, because we didn't know this much information about Ethel or the Baldocks, and we've now helped somebody else with their family history. So thank you very much.